Hi, and welcome to the President's Forum podcast. I'm your host, Wesley Smith. Today we'll be speaking with Dr. Luke Dowden. Luke serves as the Chief Online Learning Officer at Alamo Colleges District. Let's get straight to our interview. Luke, our topic today is right in your wheelhouse. We're talking about distance education and online learning. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Before we get started, I want you to introduce yourself to our audience and do a little intro for Alamo. We have had Mike on, and he came on and we talked through a bunch of different issues. So our audience has a little bit of exposure, but would you just give us, from your perspective, what does the institution stand for? What are you trying to accomplish? And then what's your role in that?
Yeah, I'll speak to our Chancellor, Dr. Mike Flores' moonshot of ending poverty, partnering to end poverty through education and training. Alamo Colleges District is located in San Antonio, Texas. We're the seventh largest city in the United States. And we're number one in a lot of categories, but the one that we're most concerned about is the number of people that are in poverty. So we lead the nation in the number one of individuals that are in poverty. And so we know that education is a great equalizer. It's an opportunity for social and economic mobility. And my part of that work is our online learning strategy. And so we have, this past fall, we had 16,554 students learning completely online in one of our 85 programs. And so those are unique individuals at our 5 colleges. And our setup is a little bit different. In Texas, there are 50 community college districts. We're the only district that has 5 independently accredited colleges. Everywhere else is multi-campus. We're multi-college. So, it makes an initiative like mine unique, where you might find an online campus at other places. What you will soon find here is a school for online learning. And I'll talk about that initiative a little bit later.
Right. Well, that's fantastic. Great background. I love the moonshot, the idea of, eliminating poverty through education. And it's all about access, especially when we're talking about populations that are impacted by poverty. If you don't solve the access issue, you can't reach those people.
That's right.
And so, we're all about access at the President's Forum. So I want to kick off. I want to talk about online learning. I want to talk about distance education. That's a huge part of access. Share with us your perspective on how those issues, distance education, online learning, have evolved since the pandemic. What have you seen, and what's the experience been at Alamo?
Well, first, I thought we did a really good job. I was here already. I've been here, just celebrated 7 years at the institution. I had been here a couple of years before. I was given a couple of teams to lead through the early stages of the pandemic. We created a Keep Teaching website, and we adopted appropriate language. So what I would say to you is we made sure, and I really held the line on, it's remote teaching, remote working, remote learning, because we wanted to distinguish the difference between emergency remote teaching and learning from high quality, well-designed online courses. And I would venture that most of us that are chief online learning officers, vice presidents of digital learning, vice provost of digital strategy, whatever the title may be, whether you're at a community college, university, has spent a lot of time dispelling the difference between emergency remote and online. So our time has been a lot about that is not online learning, right? It was emergency remote. So that's one.
Right.
I think for us, the change, one of the things that I was surprised about is that synchronous online learning through platforms like Teams or Zoom is still present. But the level that it's present at, I've been most surprised. I expected it to be a lot more prevalent. And what we've seen is there's more asynchronous online, and there's less synchronous at the Alamo Colleges District. So I really thought we're going to have our first fully online synchronous program. We do have some. They're in the non-credit side of the house, and I don't like the non-credit term, but they're in our continuing professional ed side of the house. But I really thought we would see it more on the certificate, associate degree, bachelor degree side. So that's a little surprising. We've really emphasized, to your question, intentional program design. So not just good course design, right? But intentional program design. And how does a course fit inside of a program and that experience for a student. Um,
Okay.
so anyway, and the last thing that I would say is we are placing a greater emphasis on flexible scheduling. So whether that's 8 weeks or 4 weeks or 5 weeks, and then also the ability for learners to blend their schedules. So what is interesting is that while we had 16,500 fully online, we had 14,900 that were taking some online, right? So those are
Right.
separate numbers. You can see how critical and strategic online learning is to the overall mix and learning experience of our 80,000 plus learners.
And I think the asynchronous learning is actually, I could argue it's the most flexible type of
Yes.
learning, which is really critical for learners. Whether you have two jobs and you can only get to, your learning at 10 p.m. There aren't a lot of classes on campuses that are being taught at 10 p.m. or 1 a.m. Even if it's synchronous online, that's difficult still.
Yeah, I think, and I'm not surprised it's the prevailing modality. I was surprised that we didn't see synchronous be a little bit more sticky, but it
Right.
still has a place. It is still more prevalent than it was prior to the pandemic. So while I'm surprised, it is still very much a part of our enterprise.
So I had a conversation with Phil Hill
Oh,
recently, Phil Hill on Ed
yeah.
Tech, and we talked a little bit about new technologies that are emerging that are changing the game in higher education. One of the things we talked about clearly was artificial intelligence and what that means for the future of distance and online learning. I'd love to hear your perspective on what does AI mean? What should we be thinking about in higher education with regard to that innovation?
I'm going to borrow a term used by Michelle Weiss, who wrote a book, Long Life Learning, and she talked about how we were going to hire learning, and I think about how are we going to hire AI to help us with the teaching, learning, and the working, right? So, and I actually have more questions than I have answers, right? What does it mean to have AI as your learning coach or your tutor? How are we protecting student data and students' intellectual property when we use AI tools? When will the tools mature so that personalized pathways actually adapt to students' learning styles and their knowledge gaps
Hmm.
in real time? I'm interested in those, right? Because one of the things I don't want to do, and obviously understanding the student profile we serve, we don't want to create inequities among our own students, right? And who has access to the tool and who does not.
Right.
And does the
Of
tool
course.
actually do what it says it will do? I think rather than talk about the tool itself is that how well are we prepared at scale, right? Because this isn't so a colleague of mine from University of Texas said earlier this week, we're on a subcommittee talking about AI for the state of Texas. She said, this isn't the MOOCs. This isn't massive open online courses. This is a true industrial revolution. And I think as a part of that, we need to have the skills and the capability to interrogate the technology. And we've seen this with a separate initiative that we are doing with micro credentials and digital wallets. I'll just use that example where there are many companies in that space. There are many companies in the learner employment record space, but yet the technology doesn't always do exactly what it says it will do. And so,
Right.
what are the capabilities you need to appropriately interrogate the AI? And then Dr. Flores talks about this a lot. Everything has opportunity cost. So, what are the opportunity cost of vetting the tool, integrating the tool, and then implementing the tool and assessing its efficacy and its effectiveness? So, I think about those type of things, right? Which is, and there are lots of neat things that the tool could do, right? The customized, personalized tutoring. I think about that, right? The assistant, right? I have an assistant now that's going to make sure that I don't miss deadlines. They're
Right.
going to make sure
Yep.
that I'm paying attention to all of the other things in the class that students are clicking on, right? They're gonna coach me on being a better learner, right? Luke, you need to spend 15 focused minutes reading this article. The instructors emphasize this, right? We know this
Right.
from some of
Yep.
the just basic checklist tools that are in learning management systems that students benefit from those. So that's what I would say. The other The other thing that's a growing interest to me, because I think you talk about maturity of technology, and we know generative AI is maturing at a much rapid rate than anything else, but we can't forget about the virtual and the immersive technologies that are really allowing people to gain hands-on experiences and clinical
Right.
like experiences that have been limited to small cohorts of learners. So I also don't want to leave those technologies out when we think about emerging technologies.
Yeah, those are amazing. Actually, I mean, talk about opening education up without having to have necessity of clinicals. Essentially, you can replicate that, and your throughput for students can be much greater. Well, let me ask you this: with regard to artificial
Sure.
intelligence, do you think that the rise of artificial intelligence necessitates increased online and distance education learning programs? Can you replicate that in person? Can you use AI in person the same way, or does that naturally lead to more distance and online learning?
I don't know that it naturally leads to it, right? I uh, I I don't think it hurts, but I I I don't think that it diminishes the need for a space where we are learning a technology together. We're trying things together, right? We're
Yeah,
we're doing. If you think of the Lean Six Sigma projects, right, that take place in companies where there's some I think there's still a lot of value in having multiple modalities, right? I would say
yeah,
this: I've never been an evangelist. I've been in online learning for the better part of close to 20 years. Seen a lot of like rises and falls. I think it'll support a more robust online learning experience. I sure do. I don't
yeah,
think the technology's matured, but I think it will mature fast and allow us to adopt sooner. What I think is a concern for all of us is the scale, right? So we
yeah.
need the price point to be at a point where, for us, like a large organization like ours, we can deploy it equitably to our students, faculty, and staff.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so when we look at institutions that are looking to scale online
Mhm.
programs, tell us what the biggest challenges are.
I think it's just maintaining the rigorous standards and the meaningful engagement. You know, I the that is what's hard when you're dealing with a very large portfolio of courses and programs like we have, is making
Yeah,
sure that you've got systems that are constantly looking at course design and course delivery. And those are two things. And then how are you benchmarking against the best practices that we now know work really well for quality online course design and delivery?
yeah,
Things like digitally enabled evidence-based teaching practices, which is a product of Every Learner Everywhere. So WCET is one of our major online learning member organizations, and they've got a network called Every Learner Everywhere that's documented these evidence-based teaching practices. So ensuring that you have the time to check those things, but I also think faculty bandwidth, because you're asking faculty to not only do the professional development, but to implement what they learned, to measure
yeah,
its
absolutely.
efficacy and its effectiveness, and then to analyze the results. And I think many times, because I have to interact with vendors quite a bit, they forget the time it takes, the investment in the tool, and the ramp up time before you really see the return on that emerging technology, whatever it is. So I think
Right,
time.
right.
We forget that technology doesn't always speed things up, right? Sometimes it can slow you down if you're trying to do it right with the eye on, is this really going to improve learning for our students? Which is where
Yeah,
we're
learning
very, you
outcomes
asked us
is
about us earlier, we are very student centered and very student focused. And so we're always looking through that prism of, you know, are we doing this because it's the shiny thing? Or are we doing this because it's about learning, teaching, and the student outcome? And I would
right.
say that we're always going to lean into what's best for the learner.
So now I'm going to take you ahead. I'm going to take you ahead 5 to 10 years. Let's jump ahead. We're there. And the way I'm going to ask this question is a way that is a little bit controversial. But could you see a place 5 to 10, 10 to 20 years from now where the role of faculty is much different than the role of faculty right now with regard to AI, distance, online learning, all of the tools that are developing right now? What do you see for distance education, online learning 10 years out?
Well, I think all of our roles are going to look different with AI. And I'll go back to something I said earlier. I think it's incumbent on us. So if you care about the profession of a faculty member, I'll answer it this way. Then you want to be involved now on what does it look like to teach and learn with AI, right?
Yeah.
Get engaged. And we have a range here and across the United States of faculty feelings about AI. And online learning had the same concern. I mean, I was involved in online learning in the early 90s where we had faculty members saying, you're going to record me and replace me. That's what you want to do. I've been accused of that. I've been accused of your job is to record and replace me. And I think those fears have been around way before AI. They probably with AI are maybe more intense. But I think also if you stand on the sidelines and you don't engage in the technology, you don't help to define what does it now look like, then you might be at risk of not having the future you want. So for me, I always look at, well, how are we participating in a way to guide what this will look like? And I definitely think as learning institutions, we have a role. And what I'm excited about is that I see many, research institutions that are getting involved and community colleges that are getting involved and helping to define what is the role of a faculty member going to look like with the reality of generative AI.
Right. I mean, I think what the message that I'm hearing that I completely agree with is higher education cannot afford to be on the sidelines in defining how this technology is going to be implemented and used. And if you are on the sideline, that's where you are at most at risk, is if you're not defining the future with this. But if you're engaged and you're moving forward, yeah, things can change.
Yeah.
But
and I would say the same with online learning. I mean, I've just been fortunate to be at places that wanted to be ahead. I mean, we were doing accelerated online learning at a small community college in Northwest Louisiana before OPMs emerged, and that was their model. And then I was at a large research one where we had a relationship with an OPM. I'm now at a place now that says, how do we get it the best it can be at scale consistently, right? And that's where we've recently announced the creation of our School for Online Learning. And that is really what is going to carry us into the next 2 or 3 years, where we're focused on student connectedness and belonging. So how are we actually using technology that we know there has been some technology, right? Certainly social media platforms that have really not connected, they've disconnected people. But how do we use technology in the age of AI to improve mental health and to improve connectedness and networks, right? You and I both know, Wesley, the value of networks. But we have a group of learners who will be our employees coming behind us that understand networks in a very different way, or maybe not at all. And I'm most excited about how do we use these things for human connectedness, not just efficiency, right?
Right. The last thing we'll end with, you mentioned this, the School of Online Learning being rolled out right now. Give us some details on that. What can you tell us about that and your institution's plans?
Sure, I would just say it's early days for us, and we are still in the design process, but we are very much like our other very large community college in Texas that have moved to campus models. This is just our version of it, right? And for us, the value propositions are really about best-in-class online learning. What does that look like for a learner that's our majority female Hispanic learner that may or may not be first generation, that to your point is trying to gain access not just to learning but to a better life. And so for us, that's really that's really kind of our driving force. We're going to spend the summer putting a lot of details together on what the school will do and the kind of positive impact it's going to have on learners.
Dr. Dowden, thanks for sharing your insights with us today. I'm sure that this conversation will provide valuable perspective for our audience as they navigate the evolving distance education landscape.
You bet. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Now, for our listeners, you can learn more about Alamo College's district's online programs and Dr. Dowden's work at alamo.edu. And you can see more from the forum at presidentsforum.org.